I have been the Director of Fundraising for the National Campaign since November of last year. I joined the Kennedy campaign in May of 2023, and actually just in the last 2 weeks learned I am employee number 7 in the campaign. Well, I can tell you more about my story, but first I want to congratulate everyone and thank everyone for your efforts on behalf of the RFK Jr. campaign. What you have done, what we have done together, is already changed the course of history. And I think it's really important to reflect on this because I know, I've been in a series of Zoom calls with people over the last week in particular, and there are a lot of people who are distraught, a lot of people who are very emotional, very disappointed, expressing emotions like, I feel as though everything I've done has just been wasted, it's been thrown away, and I am here to tell you that exactly the opposite is the case. That in fact, 18 months ago, very few people were talking about the issues that Robert F. Kennedy Jr. was addressing. The question of the threat to free speech, the censorship, the question of the forever wars, as Bobby has memorably called them, the question of the corporate capture of our regulatory agencies, and of course the question of the chronic disease epidemic. In fact, I'll confess that 18 months ago, you may be shocked, I did not know there was a chronic disease epidemic. I really had no idea. I thought science was coming up with cures and life expectancy was being extended, and so when I began to listen to Bobby Kennedy, it came as a shock that there was a chronic disease epidemic, that in fact these horrible conditions of autism and diabetes and a dozen others were skyrocketing, that America was sicker than ever before. Who knew that? Some people knew that. A lot of people in this room knew that, but I'll tell you, a lot of Americans did not and still do not know that that's true. So what Bobby has done is, and with our help and with your perseverance and your sacrifice and your dedication, we have succeeded in transforming the political landscape in America. When Bobby stood next to President Trump on August 23rd, 100 million people listened to him give a speech about these 4 ideas. And that is an audience approximately 100 times greater than we had at any time previous. And that would not have happened if it had not been for the efforts of the people in this room and in many other such rooms and gatherings across the country. So that's the first thing to realize, is that not only have your efforts not been in vain, but it's precisely because of your efforts that we are now transforming the entire political conversation in the United States of America. And as Charles Eisenstein, who's one of Bobby's close advisors, put it in an email recently, Bobby's ideas are transforming the DNA of the MAGA movement. You now have crowds of tens of thousands of Republicans who are chanting and cheering and yelling and applauding and standing and hooting and hollering to welcome Robert F. Kennedy Jr. into the MAGA movement. But it's not a question, in my mind, of the Republican or the MAGA movement taking over or somehow subsuming Bobby Kennedy. It's the opposite. It's that the Kennedy campaign is working into the pores and the crevices and the very DNA of not just the MAGA movement, but American life. The whole dialogue, the whole discussion, the whole, what it is that's important to the American people has been transformed because of what we've done. Now, what I'd like to do is to share a few insider stories that we've gotten in discussion with the leadership of the campaign to give you an idea.
I just want you to know that people are expecting you don't actually know about the change after.
I will address that. Thank you, dear. This is my wife, Margaret Fairchild, who is also and has done great work both in fundraising and also coordinating the table fundraising, about which I will say a little bit more a little later. But so I'd like to share with you just a few stories that Amaryllis Kennedy in particular shared with the leadership of the campaign about what went into Bobby's decision to do this. And he has talked about some of this in interviews, but on the other hand, it's possible some people may not have heard. So first of all, on the danger of nuclear war, this was actually, Amaryllis said that the first meeting that they had, so it was a meeting between Bobby and his top advisors, which included Amaryllis, Charles Eisenstein, Bridget Rasmussen, and a few others, with Trump and some of his advisors, including his son, Donald Trump Jr., who had 3-hour-long meetings. These meetings took place in Florida, in Wisconsin, and in Massachusetts. And the first meeting, Amaryllis said, began with a discussion of health issues. And Amaryllis was struck by the extent to which Trump was asking question after question of Bobby Kennedy. How would you go about actually addressing this? How quickly might it make a difference? What are the specific measures that you could take? You say, well, we have this chronic disease epidemic, but what can you actually do about this?
Nice.
And one of the stories, by the way, that's part of this is Amaryllis said there was a study done of school children. One group of school children was given the, shall we say, now normal diet, which is like Lunchables for lunch, and food coloring and all of the other additives and so on. And the other, which was the test group, so that's the control group. The test group was children who were not given any of those things. Excuse me. Actually, Margaret, could you bring me some water? And within 5 weeks, the differences between the two groups were dramatic. The control group versus the test group. The test group, in many cases, ADHD had completely disappeared. Test scores improved, which were aptitude tests, not just tests on a particular subject, but like sequencing numbers and these kinds of things. So that, imagine within 5 weeks that you could have such a dramatic difference. And indeed, Trump is thinking in terms of his first 100 days in office, made, of course, famous by Franklin Roosevelt in his first 100 days in office. What are the specific dramatic changes that can be made that will bring tangible results to the American people in that immediate first period? So Bobby was impressed that Trump was so inquisitive and asking questions. In my mind, Trump is not exactly what you would call a Socratic figure.
Well put.
So the second meeting started with a discussion of war, and in particular the Ukraine war. And Bobby told Trump that he has been contacted by senior people in the Pentagon who expressed extreme alarm that the Biden administration is showing utter deafness when it comes to Putin's repeated warnings that we are on the brink of nuclear war. You now have Ukrainian soldiers using American weapons to fire into Russian territory, killing Russians. I mean, can you imagine if, and they're within 200 miles of Moscow. Can you imagine if we had Cuban soldiers firing Russian-made missiles into American territory, killing Americans? We'd already be in nuclear war. I mean, we are so close. And most Americans have absolutely no idea. They are clueless. But it's because the media, has this sort of cartoon, Putin is the new Hitler and the brutal dictator, and we're going into Ukraine to liberate the people of Ukraine and so forth. And meanwhile, as Bobby has repeatedly pointed out, Biden has said that the real purpose of the Ukraine war is to degrade the Russian military so that they would not be able to wage war anywhere or wage a significant military conflict anywhere in the world. Which is not exactly rescuing the people of Ukraine now, is it?
The time is 5 minutes to midnight for civilization.
So in fact, there are various organizations that have what they call the nuclear war clock. And they show the hour hand pointing to 12, and the minute hand has varied depending on, when we had the strategic arms reduction talks that moved a little bit further away from nuclear war. They are now showing the nuclear war clock 5 minutes to midnight, closer than even during the Cuban Missiles Crisis. So, and Amaryllis said that Donald Trump was, as she put it, colorful and animated and passionate about how reckless and insane the Biden administration is acting toward Russia regarding nuclear war. And you can imagine when she says colorful, what she might be referring to. And she said that Donald Trump Jr., if anything, was even more passionate than his father in denouncing the Biden administration for their reckless behavior. So this also extremely significant. Compare this to Kamala Harris and her speech at the Democratic Convention. She's going to stand up to that dictator Putin, and she's going to stand up to these dictators in the Middle East, and she's going to be, the Iron Maiden or whatever. It's frightening the extent to which the Biden administration is committed to war and pouring billions and hundreds of billions of dollars every time you turn around. Let's get more weapons into Ukraine. Let's escalate even further. It's a threat literally to the survival of the human species. Then Project 2025. Bobby brought this up with Trump and said, what's the story? This seems to be a rather horrible agenda. And Trump said that he had never even heard of Project 2025 until he started being blamed for it. Project 2025 is written by the Heritage Foundation. It's not written by the Trump administration or Trump campaign. Trump said, then he did read it after he started being blamed for it. And he said, that was written by some right-wing asshole. He said, you got right-wing assholes.
Foundation.
Sorry?
Who is the Heritage Foundation?
Heritage Foundation is a conservative think tank.
Okay, thank you.
So Trump, according to Amaryllis, said, you've got right-wing assholes and you've got left-wing assholes. And this Project 2025 was written by a right-wing asshole. which, you know, is typical Trump, I would say. But also pretty good indication that he is not really with that program, despite the fact that the Democrats say, Trump's Project 2025. You know, and they repeat it ad nauseum 1,000 times, and the idea is, like Goebbels said, the big lie, you repeat a lie often enough, and you get people to believe it.
Mark, when I did a cursory read of it, because someone was saying the same thing to me, I thought it sounded pretty aligned with Kennedy. Maybe I missed some stuff.
Oh, you might have missed some stuff.
Okay.
No, it's quite, you know, it's repressive.
Okay.
It is, it's an alarming
okay.
agenda, and it definitely does not align with our capability. So, so that's an important thing to note. And then also on the question of draining the swamp, Bobby asked Trump, you know, you said you were going to drain the swamp, and yet you hired all these swamp creatures.
Yes.
And so what's the story with that? And Trump said, you know, I did not think I was going to win. All the media said that Hillary Clinton was going to win by a landslide, and I was afraid that might be true, and I was not prepared to appoint 4,000 people in 6 weeks. And that's what you're required to do when you are a president-elect, to put all these people into all these positions, 4,000 or so positions, and you've got about 6 weeks to do it. And so you had people coming forward saying, oh, I know all about the Securities and Exchange Commission, and I'm an expert in this for 20 years and so on. All right, you can have that position, and you know. So it was kind of, he went by default with the people who presented themselves. And he has now asked Bobby to head up his transition team and help him decide who he's going to put in these institutions. And he said to Bobby something to the effect that he understands that Bobby has litigated against these institutions, the FDA, the Department of Agriculture, the Department of Energy, you know, you name it. And you know, Kennedy, who the good guys are and who the bad guys are. So I need to rely on you for advice in this regard.
He didn't call him Junior?
I don't know, maybe he did. So, I mean, that's pretty amazing, right? That's pretty amazing. So, this, I hope, at least gives you a flavor of the kind of discussions that went on. And the point being that what Bobby has done is he did not make a deal. What he did was he suppressed his own personal desire to be president and sacrificed it for the good of the country. He weighed the probability, the low probability that he could be elected president of the United States. Maybe a contingent election, maybe, you know, a miracle, maybe who knows what. A probability, a possibility anyway, that he could be elected president, but it's a pretty small possibility. Versus a very large possibility that Trump would keep his word. That is, in comparison. Now, there, of course, there's still, you could say, well, how do you know Trump is going to keep his word? Well, of course, we don't. But if you compare, how likely is it that Trump is going to keep his word, and you compare that with Kamala Harris, how likely is it that she's going to completely change her mind and decide she's going to address the chronic health epidemic, and she's not going to wage war in Ukraine, and she is going to respect the First Amendment? That's a pretty small possibility. So I would say that Bobby made the right decision, that indeed it is far more likely that Bobby could do something good and profound for America under a Trump administration than if Kamala Harris were to win. There's no possibility that he would be involved in government if Kamala Harris is president of the United States. So, and in fact, Amaryllis said that she had a conversation with Tucker Carlson after this most recent Tucker Live. For those of you who may not be aware, Tucker Carlson is doing a series of events around the country. He did one recently in Anaheim, California, and this is just, a couple of nights ago. I think we are, yeah. So Amaryllis said that Tucker told her that he was astounded at what Bobby said and the fact that Bobby was willing to sacrifice his ambition for the good of the country, and that by so doing, he had uniquely qualified himself to be President of the United States. And that what's more, Tucker said that Bobby's doing so made Tucker reconsider his own value system, what it meant to be an influential person, what it meant to be, to see your own career be advanced, versus to do something which was actually for the sake of the nation. And Tucker went on to say that he felt that this event was the most historic thing that he had ever been a part of. And meanwhile, the people at the event, 17,000 Republicans gathered for this event. Primarily Republicans, who knows? There might have been some Democrats in there too. But they gave him a standing ovation. They were chanting, they were shouting, they were beside themselves with joy when Robert F. Kennedy Jr. was introduced to speak to the crowd. And that's also really quite something. I mean, some people have suggested that Trump was sitting there thinking, I wish I had this guy as my vice presidential running mate. But as Bobby said, vice president is the worst job in Washington, D.C. He absolutely did not want to be vice president. But so, who knows what, you can't, it's illegal to make a promise of a specific appointment. But Nicole Shanahan said there's a possibility that Bobby could be the new head of Health and Human Services. And in that position, of course, he would have great power. HHS has a budget of over $1 trillion. And this includes Social Security, includes Medicare, includes basically everything that has to do with health in the United States. So if he were to be put in that position, that would be quite something. We can't say he's going to be, we don't know if he's going to be, he's not been promised specifically that, although Trump did say that he wanted Bobby to be the head of his transition team.
Also, Tulsi.
And, right, so Tulsi is another factor in all of this. Tulsi, as you may know, is very anti-war. As a active duty military person herself for like 20 years. She knows how horrible war is, and she has been highly critical and very vocal in criticizing the Biden administration for their war policies. She was also highly critical of the Bush administration, the whole neocon apparatus, and she has now endorsed Trump. And imagine, a Trump administration where Tulsi Gabbard is Secretary of State and Bobby is the head of HHS.
Tulsi is also an infertility warrior.
Okay,
That does not mean.
thank you.
Can't get pregnant.
So that's what's possible with Trump. Now, I want to address the question of the 5%. So initially, when Bobby appeared, or when Bobby addressed the nation on August 23rd, he said, I'm withdrawing my name from 10 battleground states. I will still be on the ballot in 40 states. You can still vote for me there. If you're in a deeply blue or deeply red state, It won't make a difference. You can go ahead and vote for me. In the battleground states, if you're a supporter of Bobby Kennedy, I want you to vote for Trump. And part of that 5% idea was that if you get 5% of the vote, you can establish an independent party. Maybe it would be called We the People. That independent party would then have automatic ballot access. We wouldn't have to gather 1 million signatures to put an independent candidate on the ballot in 2028. And we could start running candidates as early as 2025 for state legislature and city council and all kinds of state and local offices. And I really like that perspective. I thought that was an exciting possibility. But since then, Bobby has reconsidered, and he has changed his mind. And in my view, the willingness of a public figure to change their mind and to do so publicly is the sign of a great person. He changed his mind on the question of the border. He has changed his mind in certain aspects of the question of abortion. And he said in interviews, you know, I've come to the views that I have based on the best information I had available to me at the time. If you bring to me new information that I didn't have before and I find it to be persuasive, I will change my mind. To me, that's the mark of a reasonable person. And so Bobby changed his mind, and he reflected on, you know, as they say, upon mature reflection, that this race is so close. Our internal polling, Kennedy polling, shows that it's 269 to 269 in terms of electoral votes. One electoral vote could flip the entire results of the election. And it's just too close to call. And in those conditions, you don't want to mess around with, well, if you're in this state, vote for Bobby, and if you're in that state, vote for Trump. And, you know, it's a complicated and somewhat confusing message. So Bobby has asked that we simplify, that we unify, and that we say, if you want Bobby, vote Trump. Or another way of saying it is, a vote for Trump is a vote for Kennedy. And it truly is a question of, if you want Robert F. Kennedy Jr. brought into Washington, D.C. and everything that he represents, we need the Trump administration. And what's more, if we don't do that, 2028 may be too late. If you look at the restriction on free speech and the utterly chilling statements and actions made by Kamala Harris